During this election campaign, we've heard big promises, but little detail from candidates about a very important issue: defense spending and our military.
We will boost our Made in Canada defense industry, including by joining Rearm Europe, to invest in transatlantic security with like-minded European partners.
We will establish the first post-Cold War Arctic Canadian base, CFB Iqaluit.
Now, to take a look at those promises and what Canadian troops need, we have retired Major General Dennis Thompson, former commander of the Canadian Special Operations Forces, and retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman, former commander of the Royal Canadian Navy. Great to have you both with us. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to see you, Mercedes.
Good morning.
Lots of talk about spending on the Canadian military, I feel like especially before the election campaign picked up, and then it dropped off a little after that. Now, the Conservatives have not yet released their platform. The Liberals just released theirs yesterday. They both say they've pretty much said all they have to say on defense. No really big surprises or huge numbers there that I've seen that we hadn't already heard articulated. Dennis, I want to start with you. What do you make of the two leading parties' promises so far?
Well, first of all, Mercedes, I'd say that it's the right intent. The question is, what will be the devil in the detail? And so while we're quite happy that for the first time in many gyrations, this election actually has defense on the ballot, if you will. And I think this is really driven by the fact that we have suffered what some might call the strategic abandonment of Canada by its closest ally, the United States. And that's what's driven some of the policy statements we've heard from the parties, and in particular the detailed one from the Liberal Party.
Mark, your thoughts when you've heard the promises from Mark Carney and from Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah, well, I agree with how Dennis has set this up. I think a couple of things that are different. First of all, we are now in a situation where there is no longer a lot of debate about what we need to do. It's now a question of how we're actually going to deliver on it. And that's where, as Dennis said, the devil is in the details. As far as any real distinguishing features are concerned, there is nothing that I would call out. They're in the margins for the most part. The reality is, as you pointed out in your setup, we have an institution that is chronically under-equipped, understaffed, under-resourced. We have two parties who, in essence, are racing to spend more faster than each other, and with a big emphasis being on what we need to do on our own. And I think that that's probably one of the key distinguishing features in 2025.
Well, let's talk about that a bit. Putting aside the platforms and promises, which are our promises, and we all know all kinds of things can either go very right or very wrong once a government comes in. You both know very well, and you've been with three of the services, they're under the most pressure. Because Dennis, you were an Army guy before you went to CanSoftCom. The Army, a lot of people describing it as broken. CanSoftCom under enormous pressure as they try to fill the Army's tasks that they used to do, but they just can't move fast enough. Mark, the Navy has trouble getting a ship out of harbor half the time due to issues with them and crewing. What do you see writ large for both the services and Canada in terms of what's needed? Dennis, starting with you.
Two things. One is a focus on operations and maintenance. In other words, we can't be cutting the operation and maintenance budgets of the Canadian Armed Forces on a whim, as has been done in the last fiscal year. And if you read the detailed fiscal statement of the Liberal Party, it states that it will remain the same at around $1 billion for the next fiscal year and doesn't really go up until after that. So that's important, because without operations and maintenance budgets, you cannot maintain the readiness that's necessary to address the current problems that are out there. And they're real. They exist today, so they need to be addressed. And the second thing, of course, is a reform of procurement, which everybody talks about but rarely gets around to doing. And that's going to require political will at the prime ministerial level, and it's going to require legislative change. So I don't know how you would call it, whether you'd call it a Unified Defense Procurement Act, but we need to get our act together with respect to procurement by smashing together some of the departments that are involved in this. And that includes the Department of Defense, obviously, Public Service and Procurement Canada, and INSET, the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada agency, in order to get everybody onto the same sheet of music, put them under one leader, but not in a silo, as I think as what I read in the Liberal Party platform, but as an organization that's responsible for one minister, and I would suggest it's the Minister of National Defence, so that the Prime Minister has one dog to kick when it comes to procurement, and we can get through the bottlenecks that seem to exist at the present moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians don't know that there's no single minister responsible. They just assume it's the Minister of National Defence. Not the case. There's multiple ministers. There's nothing clear in terms of how things make their way through. It can take 7 to 10 years just to get a procurement approved. Mark, you've seen that up close and personal with the Navy. But what do you think the priorities should be for both parties or for whoever wins government when it comes to establishing Canada's security and sovereignty?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on exactly what Dennis just said. I mean, he's laid it out really well. And I think to add a little more color to this for your viewers, you know, the national defense or the military, let's focus on the military as the institution that's in crisis here, it is a very complex system of systems. And the reality is that we tend to focus at one variable or on one variable in a complex equation at the expense of the others. And as Dennis made a good point with respect to operations and maintenance funding, which is basically what allows people to do their jobs on a daily basis. We tend to be distracted by big shiny objects, as I call them, which goes directly to the issue of procurement. But that in and of itself is overly complicated, as Dennis has indicated, and we need to sort that out. And there are no shortage of examples. There are no shortage of case studies to tell us that the time is finally here. I think both parties are saying that, okay, enough is enough, and now it's a question of how we're going to move forward. The other piece of this, which is important, and that we're starting to see some positive indicators, but we're so far astern a station here, to use a nautical term, it's the people side of this. Attracting people, retaining people, and ensuring that those people are properly trained, which is part of the operations and maintenance that Dennis was talking about.
Dennis, how do you do that? How do you keep the troops? Because they're talking always about more recruiting, but what I find is often missing is a discussion about retention of experienced personnel who are leaving in droves.
Bring back the excitement. Spend money on operations and maintenance and on the training that's necessary to bring these people up to speed, but also engage them in interesting missions, like the mission in Latvia, which is a drawing card for many people in the Army. If you take away the missions, you take away the interest of young Canadians who want to do something exciting, something useful for their country, and be paid for it. We shouldn't be trying to attract people that are interested in a pension, but rather people that are interested in action. And if you're going to attract those people, there needs to be something exciting for them to do. So that's the principal way to get around it. That's the bit that the politicians can solve. And internally, the military itself has an awful lot of work to do in order to streamline the recruiting process. It's been a priority for years, but it never seems to get addressed.
Mark,
and I would add, if I could, because I'd like to add an additional component to Dennis's comment on the people side of it. I think where government needs to play a more significant role is not just in sorting out the internal mechanics, as Dennis indicated, but there is a lacking component of the recognition and celebration of national service as a key component of this. I agree completely that young people will be drawn to exciting opportunities if they're well compensated and all those other components that are part of it. But part of the reason people are leaving, and I think part of the reason that people are unsure whether they want to join or not, is that there is not a sense amongst Canadian leadership and the Canadian population more broadly that service in the armed forces is actually something honorable and admirable. And that, to me, has to be a key element of going forward.
Dennis, do you feel that the changes both parties are announcing, which are on pretty similar timelines, move quickly enough?
Well, I suppose they do. I'm not sure that we could get the money out the door any faster unless we change the procurement system, and we've already discussed that. I guess my issue is, and it's the same issue that many in the defense community have, is we use 2% of GDP is the metric when what we should really be measuring is military capability. Unfortunately, that's a notoriously difficult thing to measure. And so we fall back on something that we can point to, which is dollars and cents. So if we could get the money out the door quicker, yes, I suggest, I guess we could go faster and get to this 2% target, but it would have to be on things that maybe people don't see as operational capabilities, such as infrastructure. And the infrastructure in the Canadian Armed Forces is in desperate need of reinvestment.
One of the big discussions, Mark, has been the Arctic. You dealt with that a lot as a Navy guy who was looking at planning. There's been promises about big Arctic bases before, and they haven't gotten built because it's really expensive and really hard. Do you think it's different this time?
Well, I think there is more recognition of why this is a fundamental problem. And it goes to the infrastructure comment that Dennis just made, but more broadly. You know, if we plan to stand on our own 2 feet, to put it bluntly here, first thing we have to do beyond the internal and institutional issues that we've been discussing for the last few minutes is sort out our own backyard. And at the moment, we're not capable of doing that. So as it relates to commitments and statements with respect to building in the Arctic, I'm encouraged but skeptical. I'm skeptical not because it doesn't make sense and it's not a good idea, but because our track record is so abysmal and because we're not being particularly innovative. One of the problems with the defense planning and the armed forces in general is they all want to own everything. And that is not necessarily a practical solution. And it's especially not a practical solution if you're looking at creating our infrastructure in isolated areas of the high north. What we need to do is be smarter with respect to who we partner with and how we partner with private industry and other players that are already in that space, literally.
Okay.
And so that to me is one opportunity where we
Mark,
could.
I apologize. I have to jump in because we have to wrap. Hard out for us, unfortunately. But thank you both so much for joining us with your insight. We really appreciate it.